I'm Anil Kumar. Welcome to my series on sharing with you solutions of some questions from Cambridge IGCSE resources. Here is a question from one of the papers which is called specimen paper, and that is for examinations from 2020, Mathematics Extended 0580. Now I've selected one particular question which is related to functions, which I am going to discuss. You can always look into complete solution of this test paper from another video, right? So here is the question which we'll talk about. We are given a function f of x, 20 over x plus x, where x is not equal to 0. We need to complete the table. Some values are given. And part B of this question is, on the grid, draw the graph of the function in the given interval from minus 10 to minus 1.6 and from 1.6 to 10. So we need to graph it here. So what I've done here is that I've copied the question for your convenience. So let's try to understand the question itself. One important thing which I want to highlight here is while solving such test papers, we have to keep in mind how to save our time, since time is very critical in completing the solution of the whole test paper. Correct? Now let's look into this question. Question number 3a is to complete the table for the given function, and 3b is on the graph, on the grid, draw the graph of this particular function. C is using the graph, solve the equation f of x equals to 11. So we have to read the graph also. That means very accurate drawing is required. Perfect. We'll see the other parts later. Now, to calculate the values, very simple. We have to just fill in these two values. You can plug in 5 and calculate, which is 20 divided by 5 plus 5, and that is equal to 9, right? So we found this value to be 9. You could also do one more thing. You look into the symmetry. Do you see that? So here, 0 value is not valid, and you see how these values are related, right? On this side, we have all the positive values, all negative values. However, their numbers are same, right? So what do you expect here? You expect minus 10.4, 5 times minus, that is 10.5. Is it okay? 12 and 12 already matches. So straight away, we see some trend. Does that click something? It really means that this function, if I do negative of this function, what do I get? I get 20 over minus x, which is negative of the function itself. So this is an odd function, right? So when you say an odd function, you know it is symmetric about origin. Now that helps to sketch. And that is why I'm taking a minute here to explain the concept. If you catch on this, then half of the graph can be just traced. Make it symmetric about the origin, and you're going to save lot of time. Doesn't make sense, correct? Okay. So we'll sketch the graph later exactly. Let's first try to understand. When you have this kind of a function, we do have a vertical asymptote at x equals to 0, and this x tells you what? If x is very large number, you are approaching this line. That means we have an asymptote here, right? So we have an oblique asymptote in this particular case. So if you sketch this particular graph, what do you expect? We expect that the graph is going to approach this diagonal line as it goes towards the infinity, right? So that is kind of important. And second important part is that x is not equal to 0. So we do have a vertical asymptote. Perfect. That is important. You have also noticed here that the values are actually somewhere in between missing, right? So if you look into the positive half of it, the values minimum is 9, and then it increases, correct? So as you approach closer, it increases. So the graph could be kind of like this. Do you see that? And similarly, on this side, we expect a graph like this. So that is the graph which we are expecting. So when you sketch this graph, keep this in mind. Perfect. Right. Now, question 3D is k is a prime number. F of x equals to k has no solution. Find the possible values of k. No solution will be somewhere in between. Do you see that? So you don't see any value which is between plus and minus 9. So all the prime numbers between this could be part of solution. Does make sense to you? Correct? So we could answer this question immediately. The prime numbers are 2, right? 3 and 5, and you could go to 7 also. Perfect. So 7 is also a prime number. These are the prime numbers which you could list for 3D. What I'm trying to tell you here is that you have a fairly good idea of how to sketch it, right? And then you can answer questions immediately. Using graph, but using calculator, you can estimate this value also. F of x is equal to 11. That means we know this is 9, right? So we'll try to sketch this line. Definitely, there are two values. Do you see that? So, two values, which should give you 11. And since the graph is asymptotic to y equals to x, one of the values is very close to 11. Perfect. So we get an estimate of our answer. Does make sense to you? Now, let us actually solve the equation. So all this I told you so that if you get a similar question, you should be in a position to save some time. Perfect. That is the whole idea. Now, since we have seen that the graph is symmetric about these two axes, we'll focus more on the first quadrant, right? And you can trace that over to the second quadrant. Does it make sense to you, right? So let's get back to the values. So here is the original printout, and we'll actually fill in the value which we just found. So it is symmetric. So we said this should be at 5, it should be 9, and that should be 10.5, correct? And now we have to place these values. We have also found that this is a graph which has to be symmetric or symmetry, right? So we are focusing on the quadrant 1, right? So let's use a lighter coloring so that we can mark all the points, right? So 1 point, so 5 and 9 is a good value to begin with. So 5 is just in between these two, 4 and 6, and we have a value which is 9, which is kind of here, right? So we have a value which is 5 and 9, and that is our minimum, right? Now 2 and 12, so as I move here on two side I get 12, and then 1.6, 14.1, so 1.6 means between 1 and 2, and we have 14.1, so somewhere here, right? So that is how we could get this point. 8, 10.5. So at 8 we have 10, and this is 11, 10.5 will be somewhere here, and at 10 we have 12. So at 10 we have 12, so that is next value. Joining these, we have our graph, right? Since we have to sketch only between 1.6 and 10. So let me join these with a curve, which we just talked about, correct? So that becomes, now this is asymptotic, right? So, so that's how you should be sketching it. Now on the other hand, you know it is symmetric. I'm not sketching it now, but you could copy these values and sketch on this side also, right? Does it make sense? Okay, so what I've done for you is this part. Now, from here, let's look into the other parts and try to get the answer. We wanted to know what are the prime numbers for which, now as you can see, there's nothing in between, right? So it seems that the range is above 9, right? So this is 9 for you, correct? So it is above 9. So the prime numbers less than this will be 2, and will of course be 5, right? There's nothing which can, and of course is 7. Do you see that part, correct? So we have answered those questions also. It makes sense. There's no part of the graph within this interval. So no solution. Okay, now using the graph, solve the equation f of x equals to 11. Now we have to solve for f of x equals to 11. So let me sketch a line at 11 and see where it intersects, correct? So 11 is somewhere between 10 to 12, and that is our line, correct? So one of the solutions is right here. The other one which intersects here is, it could be taken as a point slightly more than 8, right? It's on the right side. So these are the 2 points, right? So that is what we get. And you can read this solution from your graph approximately, right? You cannot be very accurate in this, but you have to estimate from the graph. So the idea here is that it is less than 3, right? It is on this side of the line. So you could say 2.8, for example, correct? So that could be 2.8, for example. And here it is slightly more than 8, right? So each division here is, now that becomes 9. So you could say it is 8.3. So my estimate will be 8.3 and 2.8, right? That is what I could estimate. Perfect. So that gives you an idea that 11 is going to be somewhere here, correct? Perfect. And somewhere there, right? Between these 2 points. So that is the estimate for us, right? Not a bad estimate. So we get a value of 2.8 and 8.3. Of course, you can use your calculator and check your value, how good it is or not. Perfect. Okay, let's move on and answer the next question now. Okay, so we have an estimate. The values for us are 2.8 and 8.3. Correct. 3e. The gradient of the graph y equals to f of x at the point 212 is -4. Write down the coordinates of the other point on the graph of this where the gradient is -4. What should be the other point? Now from the symmetry, you could easily say what the other point should be, right? Since the two graphs are symmetric. Does it make sense to you, right? So that is how understanding symmetry helps, correct? So we will say the other point is -212. So we get this point as the other, right? So you have already given 212 as a point. Since the graph is symmetric, you can see whatever the gradient is here, same we will expect at the other place also. So immediately, without even doing any work, you can say it is -212. The answer is odd symmetry. Perfect. So that is an excellent explanation. Perfect. So I hope the solutions are absolutely clear. So we got the symmetry, and from there we got our answer. The next point should be -2, -12. So it should be actually -12, right? So the answer is -2, -12. Correct? Now let's take up the next question, which is 3f. The equation of f of x equals to x squared can be written as x cubed plus px plus q equals to 0. Show that p equals to -1 and q equals to -20. Now, what are we given? We are actually given the equation of f of x as equal to 20 over x plus x, correct? Now, when we are saying that if f of x is equal to x squared can be written as this, right? Then the value of p should be -1 and q should be -20. So we'll replace f of x with x squared and solve this particular thing, right? So we have x squared here, which is equals to 20 over x plus x. If you multiply by x, you get x cubed equals to 20 plus x squared, which you can rearrange, and when you rearrange, you get x cubed minus x squared, and then 20 comes on this side, so -20 equals to 0. Now if you compare these two equations, what do you find? You find that the value of p is -1, so we get p as equals to -1, and that is q. Q is equal to -20. Does make sense to you, right? So comparison helps you to prove. So we have x cubed plus px plus q equals to 0. So that gives you these values. Perfect. Part 2 is draw the graph of y equals to x squared for -4 between x between -4 and +4. So that is a parabola, right? So we'll get back to our graph which we just sketched, and then on the same graph we can draw the parabola. So okay, so let's write down the values so that now we'll draw y equals to x square, and we are taking the values from -4 to +4. That means 16 plus and minus, right? Okay, so here we have our graph paper, and we have to sketch the function x square on this graph from -4 to +4. So -4 will give us 16, right? And +4 will give us +16. And 0 will give us 0, right? So that is the position. So that is the position of the graph, and these points plus and minus 4 are included, right? Plus and minus 4 are included. So these are your points. Second, when you to draw the graph, you can go by steps, right? So 1 square is 1. So we have, in this point, we have 1 here and 1 here. And 2 square will be 4. So at 2, we have 4 here, right? And 3 square is 9. So 3 square is 9, somewhere there, right? In between these two. Okay. So we are getting a graph kind of like this. So let me sketch this parabola, right? So we have this graph here, which is, and this graph is symmetric about y-axis. This is an even function, right? So that is your graph between these two positions, between -4 and +4. Does make sense, right? So that is how we are going to sketch this particular graph. Now the question is, using your graph, solve this equation x cubed minus x squared minus 20 equals to 0, right? Okay, so now we need to solve for x cubed minus x squared minus 20 equals to 0. How do you solve this? Well, how did we get the graph? So this is a point where x square intersects the original function, which is 20 over x plus x, correct? So from the graph, we'll find that particular point, right? So let's get back to our graph and we'll locate the point where they intersect. So this is the point where they are intersecting. So that becomes the solution, right? So the x value here is, we can say, 2 units less than this, right? So it is 3 point, let's say, so it is slightly more than 3. So we can say 3.2 or something, correct? So we could estimate a value which is 3.2. So I'll estimate this to be 3.2 as the value, right? So the x value is 3.2. Now what does it say? Using your graph, solve this equation. When we solve the equation, we are only finding the x value, right? So we get x equals to 3.2. So that becomes the answer for us. Does make sense to you, right? So we got the answer as 3.2 for this question. Now let's do question 3F4. That's the last point. Graph of y equals to x cubed minus x squared minus 20 equals to 0 has a point P and 0. So actually this 0 should not be there. Graph of y equals to x cubed minus 2x minus 20 has a point P and 0. Find n, right? Now that really means that we are going to find the x-intercept of this graph. The graph is provided to you. Here's the graph for the given function, right? So the question is right here. The diagram shows a sketch of the graph of y equals to x cubed minus x squared minus 20. P is a point n 0. Write down the value of n, correct? Now what is this value of n? This value of n has to be same which we got earlier, which is x equals to 3.2. So since, how did you get this equation? Y equals to x cubed minus x squared minus 20. We got this equation by equating x squared equals to the function. So when you bring x squared to the right side, you get this equation. So we are looking for the x-intercept. So that x-intercept has to be at x equals to 3.2. So we'll write this estimate here as our answer. Perfect. So that is how we are going to solve this particular question. I hope it helps.